Thank you for having me here. I'm Mohammad Parsasadr, and this is the work that I want to present. I actually have conducted this work with Jeff Harris. I usually shorten my family name to Parsa because I understand that this is really hard to pronounce. So, Mohammad Parsa. So, I'm actually a part-time employee for the Metal Earth Group, and I'm really glad to be a part of this group. Yep. And I want to first acknowledge Jeff Harris and Ross for accepting me as a part of this research team and Metal Earth, and I'm really glad to be part of this team. So what we want to do in this study is to actually delineate some exploration targets of orogenic gold deposits in our study area, the Sturgeon Lake. And our goal is not to just discover some mineral deposits because it is obviously not possible in this study area and in the scale that we are actually studying. But the goal is to just introduce some larger exploration targets that is actually really essential for deep exploration. So we first start with defining a suite of predictor variables or exploration targeting criteria using mineral systems approach. And then we go ahead and use those exploration targeting criteria in order to develop some robust predictive models of orogenic gold deposits. But there are some components that are really overlooked in mineral potential mapping. So those components are the issue and the problem of overfitting in machine learning based mineral potential mapping, and also the problem of uncertainty in our models. So what we have done is that actually we have measured the uncertainty, and we have come up with some solutions in order to address the problem of overfitting in our models. And so obviously the ultimate goal of this project is to delineate some targets, as I mentioned earlier. Okay, the methodology that we have applied for this work is to first define our vectors according to the mineral systems approach. And then what we have done is that we have actually selected our training and validation data sets. So these data sets actually enable us to develop our algorithm, train our algorithm. And then if our algorithm passes the verification exam, we can go ahead and develop some predictive models with them. And then the new thing that we have actually applied for this project is actually measuring the uncertainty of our model, which is really essential for delineating some confident exploration targets. So I'm going to explain it in a few slides. So the process and procedure which is used for defining exploration targeting criteria is actually using either deposit models or actually using the mineral systems approach. But the mineral systems approach enables us to define different suites of exploration targeting criteria with different scales. Here, we are using a regional scale, and what we first have to do is to first define the processes that are really important and fundamental for the formation and deposition of ore-bearing fluids. And then we need to actually find some, in our data sets, we need to find some signature features that kind of really typify those processes. After that, we need to map those signature features either directly or by using a proxy. And they can actually serve as our predictive variables. Okay, here is actually a number of signature features that we have used them in order to map those processes. So the credit for this actually goes to Jeff. Jeff has selected these exploration targets, and I've used the output of what Jeff has actually produced. So the important components that we have used is actually the geochemical signatures of our trace elements. This is a very important component that actually enables us to map some processes which are associated with our depositional process. And also we have used the lithological contacts, the different units that we have in our geological map in order to map the transfer, as a proxy for transportation process, and also other variables and other predictive variables that we have used. Okay, so we have a suite of data sets that we have used in this study. First off, we have our bedrock map, and we have used this map in order to uh, define different exploration targets. Some of those targets are actually the distance from the context of different lithological units, which are really important and essential for us in this study, because what they do actually, they enable us to, where's my laser? Okay, here we go, I think. Yeah. So they actually, what they do actually, they enable us to kind of map the transportation process, which is important and essential for us. So one of the most important exploration targeting criteria that we have used in this study is the gravity map that we can actually see it in here. So the gravity map is an important component of our study because this is the most important predictive variable that we have used. But the problem with this gravity map is that it is not actually, it doesn't really have a high resolution, and it kind of really affects our final model. I'm going to explain it in our final model. We will receive some edges because of the resolution of this data set, and we need to find a solution to address this problem. So we also have the results of chemical analysis of our geochemical data set, but unfortunately, as we can see in here, this is actually the distribution of our geochemical samples. But the problem we're having with the geochemical samples is that they are not really spatially coherent. I mean, sampling sites are really sparse, and it actually what it does actually, we cannot go ahead and develop an interpolated map using these geochemical samples, because those interpolated maps will be really biased and not really useful. Instead, what we have done is that we have defined our anomalous samples, and we have defined a buffer distance from those anomalous samples, and we have used them as some inputs for our machine learning model. Again, we have a problem, and the problem is that we will end up having some non-values for majority of our cells in our study area. So fortunately, the method that we have used in this study, random forest, as already explained by Puran, it enables us to kind of really address the problem of non-values in our data sets. And and also we have actually some magnetic data sets. We have used them in order to define high strain zones, which are actually important for the transportation of ore-bearing components for orogenic gold systems. So with these data sets, what we have done is that we have kind of developed 16 different predictor variables. So we have different types of predictor variables in this study. So some of them are continuous variables, some of them are binary, and some of them are multi-class. So each of which have different features, have some advantages and disadvantages. And some of these predictor variables are not that robust. I'm going to explain that. So with binary and multi-class variable, what we do is that we actually try to reduce the complexity of our model, and we actually simplify our model with them. But we might end up introducing some uncertainty to our final model because the majority of geological features have continuous natures, and we better use continuous maps in order to define those features. With continuous map, we obviously kind of can avoid that type of uncertainty, but we end up having a complex model, and our model will be really vulnerable to overfitting. And overfitting is a really important issue that we have to kind of really deal with that. And for this study, we have used the original values. We didn't use different types of transformations in order to normalize our data sets. I'm not really a fan of those transformations because I think they change the statistical distribution of our data sets, and so they're not that useful. Perhaps for using a neural network, it is good to transform the data set, but with methods such as random forest or support vector machine, they're not that useful. This is according to the experience that actually I've gained in my modeling. So this is another question that we have tried to address. So what we have done is that we have generated 16 different exploration targeting criteria or predictive variables, where we have to answer this question as to how robust our predictor variables actually are. And for this, we have used receiver operating characteristic curves that was explained by Hamming. So these curves enable us to measure the area under the curve or AUC values. And obviously, the higher the AUC values are, the more significant the spatial association of our variables with our mineral deposits. So here, our most important exploration targeting criterion is our gravity map. So gravity map is really important, and also the context of some of our lithological units are as important. So these are actually the lithological units that exert actually substantial control over the distribution of our mineral deposits in the Sturgeon Lake area. And this is our gravity map that we've used. So the majority of deposits actually occur in high gravity zones. And as mentioned by Jeff and also Eric, so these are all of these points actually are not mineral deposits. Some of them are showing and occurrences, but we have some limitations in using mineral deposits because we only have 7 mineral deposits or past producers. So the 7 is not actually enough number in order to develop a robust machine learning model. And there are a number of solutions for this. We can actually use data augmentation tools, or we can use showings and occurrences as we have done in this study. But perhaps we may do some experiments, and we may go ahead and produce different sets of training data, and with different sets, we can actually get different results. So this is actually a kind of topic that I want to discuss in this presentation. What is really important for machine learning based mineral potential mapping is adding some diversity to our training data sets. And that diversity is really important because with different sets of training data, we get different results. And this is the definition of uncertainty in our modeling methods. And this is actually what makes our models really not reliable at all. So we should add some components of reliability by measuring the uncertainty of our model, which I'm going to talk about it. So this is actually a brief introduction and explanation of mineral potential mapping using machine learning procedures. So the first thing that we have to do is just defining some labeled samples. Labeled samples are the values of our exploration targeting criteria in mineral deposit and non-deposit locations. Again, defining non-deposit locations is a really big challenge. And then we have to divide our samples, our labeled samples, into training and validating sets. With training and validation, we develop and kind of really train our algorithms, and then we can actually use those trained methods and algorithms in order to develop our final predictive models. So this is actually a quick example of our labeled sets of data sets. So here we have the location of our occurrences and mineral deposits all in one set. These are 102 mineral deposits, occurrences, and showings. And these are 102 randomly generated samples. They have actually been selected with a specific distance from our mineral deposits. So again, what I'm going to talk about is that we can actually generate numerous sets of non-deposit locations. And with different sets, we can get different results. And so that poses a problem to our modeling methods. But we are going to be introducing a new method, not really new, in order to address this problem. So this is an example, as I said. So this is our target variable. So we use the value of 1 for the location of our occurrences and the value of 0 for the location of non-deposits. Here we have 16 variable, but in order to be able to present it in here, I've only shown 11 of them in here. So there are a number of concepts that I have to introduce before delving into our machine learning procedure for mineral potential mapping. So there are some really important concepts that, as I mentioned earlier, are really overlooked in mineral potential mapping, but they are actually worth consideration. So these concepts are the concepts of bias, variance, and overfitting in our model. The first thing that we do when we want to develop a machine learning algorithm for either classification or regression, we select our labeled samples. So this is just a quick example of our labeled samples. This is actually a set of observations for the weight and the height of a bunch of mice. So the purpose of this actually practice is to kind of feed a model which enables us to predict the height of mice according to their weight. So the first thing that we have to do is to just separate and classify or categorize our labeled samples into two classes of training and validation sets. So blue in this example represents our training set, and green represents our validation set. So we have feed two models to our training set, a really simple model and a complex one. Here we have to define bias. Bias is the ability of our model to kind of feed the training samples. So in this case, the simple model has some values of bias, but the complex one is a perfect model in terms of bias because our bias is 0 for this complex model. And variance is the ability of the model to predict the unseen data sets or the testing data set. This is something which is really important for us because we want our model to predict the location of undiscovered mineral deposits. And so we really do not want a lot of variance in our model. Most models in this example have some degrees of variance, but the variance for the complex model is really significant. So the difference between bias and variance is called overfitting. And in this case, our complex model is really overfit. So another thing I wanted to mention is that there are different procedures in order to separate our samples classify our samples into training and testing data set. We have splitting procedures, we have leave one out approach, and we have also k-fold cross-validation, which is really kind of the same, the leave one out approach, but it is used for the situations in which the number of our labeled samples is generally large. So after explaining bias and variance, we delve into our model. So we have used random forest in order to develop our predictive model. So we have used 16 variables, as I just mentioned. So there are different numbers of trees that we can use. By using the trial and error procedure, we have selected 500 trees because this number actually resulted in a stable prediction for us. And also we have used the tune RF function of the random forest package in the R software in order to select the optimum number of predictive variables that can contribute to our modeling method. So 12 was the best number because it generated the models with the lowest values of out of the bag error. And so again, what we can do is to measure the importance of our variables using different procedures that are actually embedded in the random forest package. As we can see, the most important predictor variable that we have is the gravity data set that we have, and also the context of some of the most important lithological units that I just mentioned. So these results are really correlated with the results that we got from the receiver operating characteristic curves. So the first thing that we have done is that we also have used k-fold cross-validation. The k was selected to be 10 in this study, so we have used a 10-fold cross-validation. So the difference between cross-validation and random forest method is that random forest method uses a bootstrapping methodology in order to resample or label samples, which is kind of really useful for addressing the problem of uncertainty by adding some diversity to our model. But cross-validation is kind of really different, because with cross-validation, as you can see, we can get different results from our model. So what we have done is that we have developed fitting and prediction rate curves for our model using receiver operating characteristic curves. So our fitting is almost perfect because the average value for our fitting is 0.98, but our prediction rate is 0.87 for our models. So we have some really negligible value of bias in our study. This is for 0.01, but the value of variance can be significant. This is 0.12, which is still good. But what it tells us is that we still have some overfitting, and we need to address the problem of overfitting in our study. So this is actually the measured values of bias, variance, and overfitting. What we should do is to reduce the variance of our models. And of course, after that, we can reduce the overfitting and generalize it. We can improve the generalization of our models. So for measuring the uncertainty, so as I mentioned, we've used cross-validation, and with different sets of cross-validation label samples. Here we have 10 sets of label samples. We can generate 10 different models. And also we have the diversity that the random forest model also introduces to our data sets. So we are good with the diversity point of view that we should introduce for reducing the effects of uncertainty in our model. So for measuring that uncertainty, we can produce 10 different mineral potential models. And by measuring the standard deviation of those models, what we can do is that we can quantify the uncertainty of our model for different pixels and cells in our study area. So here we can see some of our deposit locations are actually superimposed on some places in which we have some really high values of uncertainty. So what it tells us is that those predictions are not really reliable, and we need to kind of remove those values from our modeling methods. So here actually is a chart that represents the predictive model, the average predictive models that we have received from our procedure versus the values of uncertainty. So here in this blue rectangle, I've selected the exploration targets that actually these pixels can be assumed as our exploration targets because they have high average values and they are less uncertain. And so these can be actually assumed as our less uncertain exploration targets. And this is again our exploration model. And this is our predictive model that we have produced for orogenic gold deposits of the study area against again, actually, the performance of this model, the performance was really good because we had a really high fitting rate and also prediction rate for our model, but we need to reduce the problem of overfitting. Again, overfitting is not that significant in our model, but I believe that we can do better by maybe changing the parameters or maybe simplifying our model. So majority of deposit locations are actually in high predictive value and high prospective zones, and it shows that the performance of our model has been actually good. So what we have done with this chart, we have actually used low-risk exploration target zones. These are actually cover only 6% of the study area, and they kind of predict 90% of our deposits and occurrences. So we need to do something in order to address the problem of overfitting, and this is some sort of the ongoing work that we have in progress. So there are a couple of procedures that we can apply for reducing the problem of overfitting in our model. The first thing that we can do is that we can kind of go ahead and simplify the predictive variables of our model. So we have used many continuous data sets. maybe what we can do is to just classify those variables and just compare the results. We also can use regularized regression techniques such as lasso and elastic neck techniques. Those techniques actually can resist the effects of overfitting in our model. And this is the ongoing work that we have in progress. Of course, just producing a paper from the results that we have right now, and also revising and improving the results, and maybe applying diverse machine learning algorithms to our model. So this actually concludes my presentations, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Great, thank you very much, Mohammad. Come a long way in a very short period of time. It's impressive. Eric, you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Mohammad. That was a really good presentation. I have some questions. Early on in your presentation, you showed the density and the mafic volcanics and the ultramafic volcanics. And I believe you included them, the three of them, as variables, as input variables. Was that correct?
Well, actually, what we have considered is that different lithological units have been considered as different variables. I know some of them might not be directly associated with our mineral deposits, but the beauty of using random forest is that it can wipe out the exploration targeting criteria that are not really associated with our modeling method.
Right. So what concerns me is that the three of those variables are correlated, highly correlated. And I guess within the theory of most methods, you try and have your variables as independent as possible. So would it make sense to either amalgamate those three variables into one common variable, or some dimension reducing method that would combine them or merge them into a single variable? And that way you reduce the redundancy and perhaps also influence the degree of overfitting.
Yeah, of course. So the correlation, and thank you very much. That's a great point, and I'll take a note of that. So the correlation of variables is really important, and we should try to have independent variables, as you mentioned. But maybe producing independent variables is actually good method in order to reduce the effect of overfitting. And as I said, maybe producing binary variables can be actually some remedy for our problem.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eric. Great point.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, Benoit speaking here. I enjoy your talk, but you're developing a model for orogenic gold deposit. But in the variable that you have selected, none of them include a distance from a major fault zone or a major shear zone, which this is unusual for orogenic gold deposit.
Yeah, actually, so we had, as I mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, in my third slide, I showed the variables that we have used. Those were original data sets that I have used for it. I didn't have faults. So faults are important, as you said, for actually they act as corridors for the transportation of ore-bearing fluids. What we can do is that we can further improve our model by introducing those data sets to our model and maybe using faults, because faults, as you said, are really important. Kind of really agree with you. Yeah.
The P16 variables that you have was a high-strain magnetic zone. Is this what it's supposed to be?
Yeah, that was high-strain magnetic zone, and those are actually important for the permeability, I think. So we have actually considered those as an important criterion in our model. Yeah.
But that's not the one that you have selected. You selected P1, P7, P15.
No, those were the most important ones.
Yeah.
So those were selected. Of course, I didn't select them. I selected all of the variables. But those were actually the values or predictive variables with the highest spatial association with our mineral deposits and occurrences. So we had those high strain zones, but their spatial association with our mineral deposits was not that significant.
Yeah, but that's what surprised me. If you look,
that surprised me as well. Yeah.
But are they really orogenic gold deposits?
Majority of occurrences are, or some of them are occurrences, some of them are past producers, but I believe a majority of them are orogenic gold. Yeah.
Okay.
Majority of them. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
I just have a comment, if that's okay, Ross.
Sure.
Because one of the things we're looking at now with respect to faults is we're looking at integrating what the 3D geophysics, including seismics, can tell us about the depth of these faults and the dip of these faults. So we're trying to incorporate that information by comparison to the other 3D geophysical data. So in a presentation last day, there was looking at the faults that were quite deep versus faults that were quite shallow. So we're trying to incorporate that information we get from the seismics into doing a better job at looking at our faults for orogenic gold. So that's just something we're looking at presently.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. If you look to the paper that I wrote with Patrick Mercier-Langevin in the Economic Geology, the special publication number 23, this is one of the key interpretation that we are making to try to explain why the Ladder Lake Cadillac and the Destor Porcupine Fault are so fertile compared to any other major fault in the Abitibi. It's how deep they reach.
Right. Yeah. Right.
You should have a read of that.
Yeah. Could you send me and Mohammad a copy of, or just the reference of that paper, please?
Sure.
Benoit, that would be much appreciated. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I will.
Excellent.
Thanks, Bennett. Thanks.